a team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
In 2008, archaeologists exploring the Paisley Caves in south-central Oregon made a discovery that should not have existed. Buried deep beneath the cave floor was something that looked completely ordinary. It was dried human waste, known as coprolites. At first, nobody expected it to change history, but when scientists tested the samples again and again, every result pointed to the same impossible conclusion. They were more than 14,000 years old. If those results were correct, humans had reached North America at least 1,000 years before the Clovis people, challenging a theory that had shaped American archaeology for decades. But that discovery was only the beginning. Over the following years, new discoveries in Oregon, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, and California all began pointing toward the same extraordinary conclusion. So, what exactly did scientists find? And how could something as ordinary as ancient human waste force them to rethink the story of the first Americans? Let's dive in. Paisley Caves, Oregon. For most of our lives, we all believed the same story. The first people to reach North America were the Clovis people. They crossed a frozen land bridge from Asia around 13,000 years ago and spread across the continent. Few archaeologists had any reason to question it, but hidden beneath the floor of an old cave in south-central Oregon was evidence that refused to fit that story. The Paisley Caves were first explored in 1938. Archaeologists found ancient bones and scattered artifacts, but nothing that seemed capable of changing the history of North America. The discoveries attracted little attention, and for decades, the caves remained largely forgotten. Then, in 2008, everything changed. A research team from the University of Oregon, led by Dr. Dennis L. Jenkins, returned to the site with better technology and fresh questions. They decided to dig deeper than anyone had before. Every layer they removed carried them farther back in time. The deeper they went, the more it felt as though the cave was protecting a secret that had remained hidden for thousands of years. Eventually, it revealed something no one expected. It wasn't a beautifully crafted spear point. It wasn't ancient jewelry. It was preserved human waste, known as coprolites. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary. But the dry conditions inside the caves had preserved tiny biological details that rarely survive at archaeological sites. The researchers carefully collected the samples and sent them to the laboratory. They wanted to answer one simple question: who had left them there? The answer came from something stone tools could never provide. Scientists extracted mitochondrial DNA from the coprolites. The genetic material matched the Native American founding haplogroups A2 and B2. For the first time, researchers weren't studying tools left behind by ancient people. They were studying biological evidence from the people themselves. Next came the dating. Using accelerator mass spectrometry, scientists directly dated the organic material inside the coprolites. The tests were repeated. The results stayed the same. The samples were more than 14,000 years old. If those results were correct, people had reached North America more than 1,000 years before the Clovis culture. Suddenly, a theory that had shaped American archaeology for decades no longer looked complete. This discovery did not rely on the age of nearby rocks or ancient tools. It came directly from the people who had once lived inside the cave. The Paisley Caves had quietly preserved a human story for more than 14,000 years. And for the first time, the Clovis timeline had a serious challenge. But this was only the beginning. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. Years before the Paisley Caves made headlines, another quiet site had already begun challenging everything archaeologists thought they knew. The first clue appeared in 1955, when a local historian named Albert Miller reached into a groundhog hole and pulled out several unusual artifacts. The discovery sparked curiosity, but it wasn't enough to rewrite history. That would come nearly 2 decades later. In 1973, archaeologist Dr. James Jim Adovasio began a careful excavation of the shelter. His team removed the soil one thin layer at a time, because every layer represented a different chapter of the past, and with every layer they uncovered, the story became older. The deeper they dug, the harder it became to fit the evidence into the accepted timeline. Then came the discovery that changed everything. The team recovered charcoal and other organic material for radiocarbon dating. When the laboratory results came back, they shocked almost everyone. The samples dated between 16,000 and 19,000 years old. If those dates were correct, people had reached North America thousands of years before the Clovis culture. In July 1980, Dr. James Jim Adovasio published the findings in American Antiquity. He argued that the Clovis first model could not explain the evidence from Meadowcroft. But instead of settling the debate, the paper ignited one. Many archaeologists rejected the findings outright. Some argued the samples had been contaminated. Others insisted the dating methods must be flawed. The resistance became so widespread that researchers eventually gave it a name: Clovis primacy syndrome. It described the belief that Clovis had to remain the first Americans, even when new evidence suggested otherwise. The debate continued for years. Many archaeologists remained skeptical. Others slowly began accepting that Meadowcroft deserved serious attention. But regardless of where they stood, one fact never changed. The evidence remained. It stayed in the soil. It stayed in the laboratory records. And it stayed in the published research, waiting for another discovery to either prove it wrong or prove it right. That discovery would soon arrive from a quiet site in Oregon. And this time, the evidence would become even harder to ignore. Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter sits near the small town of Riley in Harney County, Oregon. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary patch of dry land, but beneath its surface, the ground had been protecting a remarkable story for thousands of years. In 2011, a team from the University of Oregon, led by Dr. Patrick O'Grady, began carefully excavating the site. At first, the discoveries seemed ordinary. They uncovered small obsidian flakes and a handful of simple stone tools. Interesting, but nothing that appeared capable of rewriting history. Then the excavation reached a thick layer of white volcanic ash. Scientists identified it as ash from the eruption of Mount St. Helens around 15,400 to 15,600 years ago. That layer changed everything. It acted like a natural time marker. Anything buried above the ash had to be younger. Anything buried beneath it had to be older. The team carefully continued digging below the ash. What they found exceeded every expectation. First came 27 pieces of camel tooth enamel. Then they uncovered the remains of Bison antiquus, a much larger ancestor of today's American buffalo. Both animals lived during the last ice age and disappeared thousands of years ago. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. The archaeologists uncovered a beautifully crafted tool made from bright orange chalcedony. It wasn't an ordinary knife. One edge had been shaped for cutting, another for scraping. A third contained tiny saw-like teeth. The worn edges showed it had been sharpened and reused many times. Dr. Patrick O'Grady later compared it to a Swiss Army knife because a single tool could perform several different jobs. Then the team noticed something even more important. The tool had been buried beneath the camel's teeth and beneath the volcanic ash. Its position meant it had to be older than both. Independent laboratories dated the nearby animal remains more than once. Each test pointed to the same remarkable age, roughly 18,000 to 22,000 years old. If those dates were correct, people had been living in Oregon thousands of years before the Clovis culture. Then another detail made the discovery even harder to explain. The tool didn't resemble Clovis technology at all. Instead, it belonged to the Western stemmed tradition. A completely different style of tool-making suggested it may have been made by an entirely different group of people. By now, Oregon was no longer producing a single surprising discovery. It was producing multiple independent lines of evidence, all pointing toward a much older human story. With every excavation, the Clovis timeline became harder to defend. But the most remarkable discovery was still waiting. Because hundreds of miles away, in the white sands of New Mexico, archaeologists would soon uncover evidence that pushed the timeline even deeper into the past. White Sands, New Mexico. Unlike the discoveries in Oregon and Pennsylvania, this one did not begin with stone tools or ancient DNA. It began with something far more personal. In 2009, researchers walking across the brilliant white gypsum flats noticed strange impressions pressed into the ground. At first, they looked like ordinary marks. Then, the team looked closer. They realized they were standing on ancient human footprints, and not just a few. Researchers eventually documented 61 preserved footprints along the shoreline of the ancient Lake Otero. Some belonged to adults. Others belonged to children. Families had once walked across this landscape together, leaving behind a journey that the ground quietly preserved for thousands of years. Finding the footprints was extraordinary. Proving their age would be much harder. Scientists needed evidence strong enough to convince even their biggest critics. Their first study used radiocarbon dating on rupia, or ditch grass, seeds buried in the same layers as the footprints. The results stunned the research team. The seeds dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. If that was true, humans had reached North America during the last ice age, thousands of years earlier than most archaeologists believed. Not everyone accepted the conclusion. Some researchers argued that groundwater might have affected the seeds, but instead of defending the results with arguments, the team gathered new evidence. They turned to something completely different: conifer pollen. Unlike the seeds, pollen is not affected by groundwater in the same way. When scientists dated the pollen, the results closely matched the original study. The evidence had grown stronger. Even then, questions remained. So the researchers carried out a third, completely independent analysis using organic wetland sediments from the ancient lake deposits. In June 2025, the results were published in Science Advances. For the third time, the dates pointed to exactly the same period, between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. 3 different dating methods, 3 independent results, 1 remarkable conclusion. The footprints were genuinely that old. That meant these people had lived in North America during one of the coldest periods of the last ice age. And they were not alone. Researchers also discovered the tracks of Columbian mammoths and giant ground sloths preserved beside the human footprints. Humans and Ice Age giants had crossed the same muddy ground before it hardened and remained untouched for thousands of years. The Clovis timeline was no longer being challenged by one discovery. It was being challenged by many. Then, California uncovered evidence that raised an even bigger question. Not just when humans first arrived, but what they were capable of doing once they got there. The Cerruti site. The discoveries in Oregon, Pennsylvania, and New Mexico had already pushed the story of North America much farther into the past. Until now, archaeologists had been asking one question: when did the first people arrive? The Cerruti site forced them to ask a completely different one. Who was here 130,000 years ago? The discovery happened by accident. During freeway construction near San Diego, California, workers struck something unusual beneath the ground. Construction stopped immediately, and paleontologists were called to investigate. As they carefully removed the surrounding soil, they uncovered the partial skeleton of a mastodon, one of the giant animals that roamed North America during the Ice Age. At first, it looked like another important fossil. Then the bones began telling a different story. Several bones contained distinctive spiral fractures. Scientists know these kinds of breaks usually happen only when fresh bones are struck with tremendous force. Dry bones break very differently. Then another clue appeared. Scattered nearby were several large stones that did not naturally belong to the surrounding sediments. Researchers proposed that they had been brought there and used as hammerstones and anvils. If that interpretation was correct, someone had deliberately broken the mastodon's bones to reach the nutrient-rich marrow inside. Then came the biggest surprise of all. Researchers used uranium-thorium dating to determine the age of the site. The tests were repeated. The answer remained the same: about 130,700 years old. The result stunned researchers. It was more than 100,000 years older than the earliest widely accepted evidence for modern humans in North America. In 2017, the journal Nature published the study. It immediately became one of the most controversial papers in modern archaeology. Some researchers argued that the broken bones and stone tools clearly showed deliberate human activity. Others believed natural geological processes could have produced similar damage without any humans at all. The debate continues today, but regardless of which explanation proves correct, one mystery remains impossible to ignore. If humans really modified those bones, who were they? Modern humans were not believed to be in North America 130,000 years ago. No accepted migration model explains who those toolmakers could have been, or how they reached the continent so early. For that reason, many archaeologists remain cautious, waiting for more evidence before drawing firm conclusions. Even so, the Cerruti site changed the conversation. It reminded scientists that archaeology doesn't simply answer old questions. Sometimes it asks entirely new ones. And when all of these discoveries are placed side by side, they begin to tell a story that no single site can explain on its own. History still changing. When all of these discoveries are placed on the same timeline, they begin telling a much bigger story. Paisley Caves showed that human DNA existed in North America more than 14,000 years ago. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter suggested people were already living in western Pennsylvania between 16,000 and 19,000 years ago. Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter near Riley in Harney County, Oregon, revealed stone tools and animal remains dating back roughly 18,000 to 22,000 years. White Sands National Park preserved human footprints from 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. Then, the Cerruti site in California raised an even greater mystery with evidence dated to about 130,700 years. None of these discoveries stands alone. Each one adds another piece to a much larger picture. Together, they make the old Clovis first story much harder to defend. Scientists are no longer asking only one simple question about when people arrived. They are now trying to understand how many different journeys may have happened. Some researchers think people may have reached North America much earlier than once believed. Others believe several groups arrived at different times using different routes. Some evidence points toward travel along the Pacific coast, instead of only crossing the land bridge. The stone tools also tell an important story. The Western stemmed tradition looks very different from Clovis technology. Ancient DNA from Paisley Caves adds another kind of evidence that stone tools alone cannot provide. Each new discovery brings a different answer, but it also creates another mystery. That is how science moves forward. Scientists test ideas, question old beliefs, and compare new evidence with older discoveries. Not every archaeologist agrees with every conclusion, and healthy debate remains an important part of research. New excavations continue every year, and every dig has the chance to uncover another missing piece of the past. Somewhere beneath a quiet field, an empty cave, or a dry lake bed, another discovery may already be waiting. It could support today's ideas, or it could change them once again. That is why archaeology remains one of the most exciting fields of science. It reminds us that history is never completely finished. It grows stronger every time new evidence comes to light. And the next discovery in the future may change everything once again. Every new discovery reminds us that history is never truly finished. The more we uncover, the more we realize how much has been lost, buried, or simply misunderstood. Now we'd like to hear your thoughts. Which discovery shocked you the most? And what discovery do you think archaeologists will make next that could rewrite human history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because we'd love to hear your ideas. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like this video and subscribe for more amazing discoveries. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure.